Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, I played this clip of Pierre Poilievre addressing the House of Commons, and this is in the debates about the throne speech. And he is talking about the difference between 2% and 5%. And what I want to illustrate with this is when you have somebody who's operated in the world of finance for as long as Mr. Poilievre has operated in that world, then you have somebody who looks at things fundamentally through a different lens than somebody who has not operated in that world. And so here is Mr. Poilievre asking the difference between 2% and 5%. Here we go.
But those rates are not going to be low forever. Unless you believe that the debt will be paid off before the rates rise, then you have to believe that we've got trouble down the road. This government is not planning to pay back the debt ever. In fact, its own projections suggest that the debt will grow every year forever. And so, are they really expecting us to believe that never in the future will we return to normal levels of interest rates? Let me put it into perspective. This year, the effective interest rate across all of our debt will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 2%. That's not the bond yield today, but it's the average across the entire stock of federal debt, about 2%. The average over the last 2 decades is 5%. Do you know what the difference is between 5% and 2%? Someone said 3. They'll almost be right. 5% is more than double 2%. It is an increase of over 100%. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it is a massive increase and a massive change in our budget picture.
So here is, and I'll let him finish. He's going to say when you apply that to over $1 trillion worth of debt, that's exponential. It's very bad. But fundamentally, I'm just saying the perspective that somebody who works in that field brings to this right away as a base starting point is different than somebody who doesn't work in that area. And we have a finance minister who doesn't work in finance. Okay. And that's the point I was going to try and make yesterday, but I forgot to do that. So, and the speech is worthwhile. Again, he's telling a story and he's weaving it. So why am I talking about finances and budgets and money and the fact that the Liberals are planning to never return to a normal interest rate or to have this debt cleaned up before the interest rates rise? I don't see how they're going to do the second one. So here's 2 interesting clips from the same video. I'm going to start off at the beginning here because this guy is saying, former finance minister John Manley, he says that it's premature to release a budget right now because you don't know anything of the balance sheet, right? And the second half of this, he says it's terribly irresponsible what's happening. So we'll start with the first one and then go to the second one. Pundit Class says, I think this is the first time in Canadian history any government, let alone a minority government, has attempted to govern without a budget. It actually threatens our entire system of democracy, yet the left are busy trying to normalize it. Here we go.
I think it's premature to bring in a budget because I don't think you can realistically predict what the revenue side of that will look like. Nor can you really, because of all these programs, accurately predict what the expenditure side will look like. So I'm not sure what good a budget would do. You put a blindfold on and throw a dart at the wall and see what you get.
Ha 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 ha. No, I think you should probably have an idea of maybe what revenues coming in and what expenditures you'd have, and could you pay for it, and how would you pay for it in the future, right? Like if you were to make these things permanent. And when I said what a poor idea this is, he illustrates that, and this is 108, I think. So he illustrates that if you were to take the spending before COVID and just kick it out for a few years, make it permanent, right? Yves Blanchette? No, the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer. I think his last name is Yves. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It does matter, but this is an aside, so I'm not going to check it out. He was saying that as soon as you do something, maybe you can do it for a year or 2, but as soon as you do something for 3 or 4 years, it's effectively permanent in the budget, and we can't afford a lot of this spending permanently. Now, he was specifically talking about the spending for COVID, right? Like we can't afford this level of expense, basically, unendingly. But Mr. Manley is talking about, if you take the spending pre-COVID and just make that permanent, that's still not going to work. This is a bad idea. It's all a bad idea. And I think that this goes to the base starting point of our finance minister, the base starting point of our drama teacher, prime minister, and the fact that their perspective is not what somebody coming from a finance background would look at. Harper was from a finance background. He understood the challenges and he understood the potential impact, right? What's the difference between 2% and 5%? Nice and slow for everybody to understand, right, Mr. Polyev? But the difference is when you come at it from a completely different perspective, when you don't even start at the base understanding that 2% is really cheap and 5% is more than double that, then everybody's in bad trouble, because by the time you realize that there's a problem, the problem's compounded, right? Like, and the problem's compounded. I'm trying to raise awareness of the impending further problems down the road as interest rates rise or not. So anyway, back to here's Mr. John Manley, former finance minister, on the second half of this. Here we go.
Program spending level that existed prior to this, and maintain that for 10 years, after all of these special programs come down, which is not this fiscal year, but the next one, you would still be running a deficit of $40 billion, and it would be adding up quickly. If you increase your spending at all, then you start to really project that deficit up into the stratosphere and your debt to GDP ratio with it. So, I'd like to think that there are all these people that made a killing on the pandemic and they're going to pay for this, but I don't know who they are. We used to have an old saying, I don't know if they used it when Ralph was at the Department of Finance, but the best taxation was don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that guy behind the tree. That guy isn't there, so we're gonna have to pay for this, and so making sure that we're prudent and careful is really part of the message that I would like to hear.
Prudent and careful, 2 words Justin Trudeau kicks you out of cabinet for hearing. Right? That guy at the end of the table that says, shouldn't we look at balancing the budget and not spending too much right now? Out the window, right? Out the window. Okay, here's the Financial Post. They say federal deficit hit $148.6 billion through July, Finance Department says. This is back when we had a finance minister who was Mr. Morneau, and he understood finance a little bit differently than Miss Freeland and Mr. Trudeau. The federal government ran a deficit of $148.6 billion during the first 4 months of its 2020-2021 fiscal year, the result of unprecedented spending in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The result compared with a deficit of $1.6 billion for the same period in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. In its monthly fiscal monitor, the Finance Department says program expenses for the 4-month period of April to July hit $215.7 billion, up $111.1 billion, or 106.2% from the same period a year earlier. Major transfers to persons, which consist this fiscal year of seniors' benefits, employment insurance payments, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, and children's benefits, increased by 170.8% year over year, hitting almost $87.3 billion. About $50.4 billion of the overall increase of $55.1 billion from the same period the year before was related to the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, which starts to expire this weekend. Also adding the spending cost was the government's wage subsidy program, with the fiscal monitor which the fiscal monitor says cost almost $30.6 billion over 4 months. Revenues for the period totaled just over $73.9 billion, down $38.3 billion, or 34.1% compared to with the same period last year, mainly a result of measures such as the enhanced GST credit and tax deferrals. Public debt charges increased by about $2.4 billion, or 25%, to $6.8 billion from $9.2 billion, largely reflecting lower consumption price index adjustments or real return bonds. In July, the Liberals projected a historic deficit of $343.2 billion for this fiscal year. The Financial Department says that figures through the same month remain consistent with that estimate. The deficit estimate doesn't include the cost of a suite of new benefits replacing the expiring CURB, which the Liberals previously estimated to cost $37 billion, or any of the sweeping promises announced in this week's throne speech. Private sector economists have estimated the promised new spending, combined with program spending to date, could push the federal deficit to as high as $400 billion. I think that's probably a conservative estimate of that. Here is a list of the spending. I think think the last time it was updated was August, though. Like, I don't think that it's been updated recently. But here's a list of the spending. I was trying to show you kind of what they're spending the money on. I'd seen articles of them spending money at the WHO. I'd seen articles of them spending money in to NGOs, non-governmental organizations, but I couldn't actually find the list. Usually there's an itemized list of where the money is spent. Support for vulnerable groups is interesting. The number of times Indigenous community or Indigenous women show up is a lot. I mean, it's notable, right? Like, it's notable. So anyway, there's a list there if you want to go through it. It's interesting, right? Here's global news commentary. Trudeau overspent on COVID. Let's see if voters care. This links to Fraser Institute article that talks about how the federal government wasted billions on poorly targeted assistance. I'm less worried about poorly targeted assistance. I mean, it shows their incompetence, but we knew that they were incompetent. I'm less worried about that than I am worried about money going right out the door to NGOs, like replacing the $450 million that Trump promised to the WHO as a COVID response money. Like that stuff bothers me. Not kind of bothers me. That stuff bothers me. I don't think that we should be doing that. But poorly targeted assistance, an argument can be made, and these people are obviously wanting to be convinced, right? And they want to split people into groups. So they're doing the targeting specifically to buy voter blocks. So, I mean, looking at it through a political lens, I understand why they're doing it, right? And the poorly targeted, again, shows incompetence, and it shows the politicization of this whole thing, right? In my opinion. Okay, so that's why I think they're doing it. And again, I'm less worried about the poorly targeted assistance. I think everybody does it, and I think that it's not the right way to do it. I think that the right way to do it is an across-the-board tax cut, across-the-board benefits for Canadians. And people will make the argument, oh well, it benefits the richest the most, and they get the most. That's not how it shakes out, in my opinion. Like, you've seen the early on in my videos, I did Sarah Huckabee Sanders did the reporters go out for the beer, right? And 3 of the reporters pay for most of the beer. It's how debt and taxes work, basically. And usually, like, tax cuts do benefit the rich, but they benefit the poor too. Okay, moving on. Getting waylaid here. Pablo Rodriguez, who is the leader of the government and the Lieutenant de Quebec, leader of the government in the House of Commons and the Quebec Lieutenant, he says, we're entering the second wave and millions of Canadians are still struggling to make ends meet. We now have an agreement with the NDP on a bill that will deliver the help Canadians need. It's by working together that we'll get through this pandemic. This is the first news that I saw of the NDP propping up the Liberal government. So we'll be getting through this throne speech without an election. And here's global news on this. Breaking: the NDP intend to back the government in an upcoming confidence vote, preventing a fall election. Global News has learned, right? So Jagmeet Singh's got what he wanted, or enough of what he wanted to back the government. Stephen Taylor, and he is the former senior political advisor to former leader in opposition in Canada's parliament. He was an advisor for Andrew Scheer, I believe. He says the only practical distinction for being an NDP MP these days is that they're excluded from the pool of potential cabinet appointments. Otherwise, they're way back benchers. I think that's true. Especially in this situation. Here's another backbencher. He's no longer a Liberal MP, but he was a Liberal MP, and he didn't tell anybody that he was arrested. And the Guelph police didn't tell anybody that he was arrested, despite the fact that that's a standing order in the House of Commons. But National Post is reporting sitting MP Marwan Tabera has a court hearing for assault, harassment, and break-and-enter charges. So, yeah, that's the kind of individuals the Liberals are just wonderful, happy to have on their tickets. You know, those assaulting MPs. Okay. Norman Levine, Trudeau Liberals give $320 million to Newfoundlanders oil industry. That's the same Newfoundland where all the MPs are Liberal. Trudeau Liberals give Western Canada's oil industry the back of their hand. Welcome to politics in Canada. Shameful. So, Eastern oil is okay, and Alberta oil doesn't have the public license. I think that was the term. No public will for Western oil. I wonder what they'll think of Newfoundland oil. Here is there was an online roundtable with Mr. Gallibo. This guy's the information minister, and he's got his microphone. And I mean, like, man, it took me a while.
I'm not sure where you saw in the speech from the throne or some of my comments.
It took me a little while to get my microphone calibrated, but the Bill Morneau was like painful to watch. Honestly, I felt like I was watching a Will Ferrell sketch every time I saw him on like the live streams and stuff. Like turning a microphone on and like checking yourself and making sure things are set up is not that hard to do. And if you're like an MP or a member of government, especially a cabinet minister, you should be able to like have somebody come in and say like set your mic if you don't know how to do it. Like basic 101 stuff. You're a cabinet minister? Get your tech on point, man. You're the information minister, the heritage minister, talking about the information what was it? The information sector, right? And you're going to be. He wants to license websites, and there's talk of a link tax. He's on record as saying this, but here he says some people on the right say that we're talking about censorship. We're not talking about censorship, and they're talking about censorship, and I don't care what this guy says. But seriously, like how unprofessional. How unprofessional. We're all going to get together and we're online news and oh yeah, we're going to talk about our heritage. What BS. Garbage. Colin DeMello, okay, moving into Ontario. Colin DeMello says yesterday, Ontario is imposing new measures on restaurants, bars, and nightclubs. Last calls at 11, closed for in-person dining at midnight, 12 a.m. Alcohol consumption prohibited from midnight to 9 a.m. All strip clubs in Ontario will be closed starting tomorrow. Does the virus know it's 11 o'clock? What's the difference between being in a bar at 10 o'clock and being in the bar at 1 o'clock? Please explain to me. You're a little bit more drunk? Haven't we solved that problem? Like, do you want to destroy the industry completely in the province? Like, this is not the right move. And it's not backed up by the data. And I've got an entire COVID video because Toronto messed with their chart. They're talking about Toronto messed with the chart, and I've got the evidence, not the evidence, but I've got somebody else who went through this and looked at what they've done. So I'm going to tell you all about that. I've got my video of the chart, of the Toronto chart that they removed, just in case you've forgotten. So there's lots of COVID stuff, but I don't think the numbers back up what they're trying to do with this lockdown. Like, oh no, the second wave is here. Everybody must listen. I'm sorry for your luck, restaurants and businesses. We're going to kneecap you based on, no deaths since August 28th. I heard maybe one death this morning, but I can't verify that because the new Toronto site is such garbage. Maybe it's a death in Ontario and not in Toronto. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I heard there was one death this morning, but or one death maybe yesterday. I'm not sure. But as far as I know, there's no deaths in Toronto in the month of September from COVID-19. So these are draconian, and they're just going to punish people who have small businesses and punish people who have jobs in small businesses. What's the busiest time in a nightclub? It's not 10 to 11. Okay. City News, it says the Ford government says all restaurants, bars, and nightclubs across the province must close by midnight each night as part of new measures aimed at slowing the spread of COVID-19. Because the virus knows it's midnight and is coming out twice as hard. Guys, it's midnight, time to party. This is just draconian. Like, I couldn't imagine going to the bar. How do you flirt with the bartender? But like through that, come on. How does the bartender flirt? Come on, right? And that goes like for male and female. This is a picture of a female bartender, but really, like, that is part of the whole thing, right? Like, and this is just, I don't don masks during flu season, despite flu killing a comparable amount of people in my age bracket. I don't get worried about it if I go out to a nightclub or a movie. Even if there's an outbreak in my city, I'm not particularly worried about a flu, right? And COVID doesn't appear to be any more deadly than a flu. Recent CDC data, blah, blah, blah. So this just seems like control. This just seems like, look what we can make you do. And look what we can make you do further, right? No more strip clubs. Everything has to be closed by midnight. No more dancing. No more singing. I don't know. Here's Quebec as well. We're making these changes because positive cases, outbreaks, and hospitalizations are on the rise in regions. Which hospitals? I haven't seen any hospitals peak. I've got lots of people on Twitter saying, lots of hospitals near me are at capacity. And I'm like, link please. Hospitals have live, capacity, whatever. Please send me the link. I'd love to see it. They just get mad at me. They just like either block me or come back with vitriol or don't respond at all. And it's like, okay, you might as well not have said anything. Cases and outbreaks are pretty much the same thing, right? Like cases, outbreaks. ICU, how about that? Anything in the ICU? No? Why is it that It's news of lockdowns and fines and not news. And I'm thankful that lots of people aren't dying. I am. I'm very thankful. But the lockdown is being propagated by fines and mandated orders, and not because people are dropping dead, and not because there's lots of people overwhelming the hospitals, not because, oh my goodness, we need to stop this. It's because politicians are telling us that this thing is coming. It's coming 2 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, in just a month, in just 2 more weeks, in just 6 more weeks, you'll see those real big numbers. It's a lie. It's a lie. The numbers are a lie. There's the real numbers, and they scrub them. They scrub them on purpose. This is egregious, right? The deaths is a flat line, and no deaths. 3 deaths for the whole summer, and no deaths for a month. You liars. You liars. It gets very frustrating having to play the game when they have absolutely no data to back it up, right? Absolutely frustrating. Here's Toronto Public Health ordering 4 Toronto businesses closed until they satisfy conditions spelled out in the orders under the Health Protection and Promotion Act. Names of businesses not released yet. Orders are being served, but Toronto Public Health says they are hospitality focused. Remember, I was talking about the labor inspectors traded for the nurses, right? 95 nurses gone. 98 labor inspectors. Welcome to the job, guys. You shut down those businesses. Good, right? Here is a teacher from Barrie. I guess he's a teacher. Climate education, community activist, movie enthusiast, Jays Raptors fan. Thoughts are his own, proud Canadian. I don't know if he's a teacher. But he says, every morning, 8 seconds to acknowledge Black, racialized, and Indigenous students. What is a racialized student? I wonder if the board in that jurisdiction has defined what racialized means. And they're emulating the same action that killed George Floyd. Does anybody not see this? Like, has nobody in this little lineup of wokeness mentioned that to anybody else? You morons. Black Lives Matter is Marxist, and it is propagating Marxist and it is Marxist and racist ideology. I did a 7 video, and I'm working on video 8 expose on what's happening in my board, in the Upper Grand board. I don't know why this one's not working.
Good.
Okay, it is. So if you're interested, they're all collected on this page here. You can check it out and watch all 7. It's a little long. I'm a little long-winded, and it's in depth, and you can actually see all of the paperwork as well. It's all linked. So I hope you enjoy that if you're interested in this. But it is much further than just Guelph. This is Barrie, and it's all over the place. It's all over the place. They are teaching this to your children as if it is true, and it is not. It is not true, but it is being taught as fact. And look at this. I mean, true believers, right? True believers. Unbelievable. These are the people educating our children. Just makes me sad. I'd much rather have people learning how to think critically and come to conclusions on their own. And I'd much rather have school teachers be apolitical rather than activist. I was going to say actively political, but I think activist works better. And this is clearly activism. Like, this isn't education. This is indoctrination. This is just so irresponsible. I hope somebody talks to these people. I hope, like, an employer, right, and says, don't do this. This is not appropriate. Last story for this morning. Blacklock's reporter says ex-Liberal MP Frank Bayless firm bid and won $423,000 Industry Canada contract while Frank sat on our Commons Industry Committee. This is incomprehensible. It's just how government's done. Listen, the way we're governed in Liberal land right now is you give money to your friends and relatives, or people who will kick back money to your friends and relatives. If you get caught, you prorogue Parliament and cut off any investigation for a couple of months, and then you bribe the NDP to make sure the government doesn't fall, and you do it all over again. Right? And who needs a budget? Certainly not these guys, right? Who needs a budget? Psh, budgets are so 1999. Forget budgets, right? We've got the NDP. Right? They're definitely going to prop us up. Who needs a budget? They don't want a budget. We don't want a budget. You know what budgets do? Budgets just make you feel bad about how much money you owe, when really you just need to embrace it, right? Embrace it. Bullshit. Put your head in the sand, hide from it, and hope that it doesn't catch up with you while you're still in power. I think that's what's going to happen. And the people who are left to clean up the mess Well, I mean, that's what conservative governments do traditionally, right? They clean up the mess enough for the Liberals to come in and take a wrecking ball every few years. So welcome to the wrecking ball, right? Thanks, Jagmeet Singh. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Do check out my 7-series report. It is very interesting. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And there's still more. It's crazy. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful